In the first video, we covered two myths regarding profit and profitability. In this video, we will cover three more, which are not exactly the same but are related. So, in this video, we'll have myths 3, 4, and 5. Myth 3. Myth 3 basically says that if you're going to get money from somewhere, get money using debt. Debt financing is cheaper. This is, of course, compared to other forms of financing, like using your internally generated funds or using equity financing. This proposition basically says that debt is cheaper. Well, it doesn't happen to be true. Think of it two ways. The first is sooner or later, they're going to come for the pound of flesh, right? The pound of flesh is, of course, just a story in The Merchant of Venice. But in reality, anyone who lends you money comes for his pound of flesh sooner or later. Even if he doesn't come for his pound of flesh, when he gives you money, when the bank gives you money, there are going to be so many conditions and constraints upon your operations that you will find yourself bound hand and foot when the time comes to do something. You must ask yourself, is it worth it? Usually, the answer is no, it's not worth it. A related myth, which is more dangerous, is to look at interest rates in India versus interest rates in the US and say, oh, why do I not go abroad and borrow? Borrowing in foreign currency seems to be cheaper. It is, of course, true that interest rates in, say, the USD are lower than interest rates in INR in India. But then you must ask yourself, what happened to Venezuela? Venezuela is a very good horror story for us to learn from. They ended up borrowing in foreign exchange, mostly in US dollars, and found that as their income went down, with oil prices going down, the cost of servicing the debt became so great that it bankrupted the entire country. That could happen to anybody. It could happen to you. Because what happens is the foreign currency rate is not in your control. It will change for reasons beyond your control. There is nothing you can do about it. The other fact is that if interest rates are lower abroad, there's a reason for it. Interest rates are correlated with inflation rates. Typically, the interest rate in the US is lower because the inflation in the US is lower. See, inflation erodes the value of currency. So when you borrow money in dollars, the value of the dollar keeps going up against the rupee. So when the time comes to repay that dollar loan, you have to pay in many more rupees than you anticipated. Why? Because the exchange rate has changed. So basically, the fact is, and there are theories in economics that talk about this, called interest rate parity and purchasing power parity, that say exactly this. In other words, if you ignore inflation differences, you can think that foreign currency debt is cheaper, but it isn't true at the end of the day. So, how does one deal with foreign exchange risk? The standard answer is buy forward cover, and that is myth number 5. Buying forward cover is the obvious answer to how to protect yourself from forex risk. But again, it is a bit of a myth, although I don't think it's such a bad thing to do. The reason it's a bit of a myth is look at it. Where does the forward rate come from? The forward rate is determined by the money markets, by the foreign currency markets, based on what they expect the future spot rate to be. In fact, there are many empirical studies which show that the forward rate is equal to the expected future rate. So, on average, you're gaining nothing. On average, you're exactly where you expect to be if you did nothing. Is it worth it? In fact, there are studies, one that was published in the McKinsey Quarterly, that showed that if you do nothing, that is, you don't buy forward cover and just let the chips fall where they may, you end up on average being exactly where you were, no better off, no worse off than if you had bought forward cover. In other words, it's not worth it. on average. And remember, the bank doesn't give you forward cover free, they charge you for it. Yet they're in the business of making money any which way they can. Really, the most serious problem is that risk is made up of two parts: price risk and quantity risk. The forward hedge only deals with the price risk. The quantity risk remains. There have been occasions where business goes down, but the exchange rate goes up, making up for each other. In other words, God gives you a natural hedge. If you go and buy a forward cover, you're disturbing the hedge that God gave you. Why would you want to do that? Why then do CFOs make such a big deal of buying forward cover and reporting it to the board? I suspect the main reason is they're covering their ass in front of the board. If they do nothing, the board will ask them questions. But why didn't you buy forward cover? So, with all these five myths we have explored, I hope the common lesson is clear. Common sense is always right.